They will call me a murderer before I even knew I was suspected. I stood beneath the cold, white lights of the Hale Group boardroom, while 23 people stared at me as if I had already been convicted. On the wall behind the chairman's seat, the photograph of Victor Hale looked down at us with the same stern expression he had worn for 30 years. His coffin had been lowered into the ground less than 6 hours ago. Now his lawyer was reading my name from the last page of his will. Adrian Hale, Mr. Mercer said slowly, is to be investigated for the death of Victor Hale. A chair scraped violently against the floor. My Uncle Malcolm stood first. You heard him, he snapped. The old man knew what Adrian did. A murmur passed through the room. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. I looked at Malcolm. He wasn't grieving. He was watching me, and there was something in his eyes that made the back of my neck turn cold. Fear. Not mine. His. I glanced at the will again. There was a second sentence beneath my name. All evidence necessary to establish the truth has been secured. My heart stopped for half a beat. What evidence? And why had Victor written this before he died? Mr. Mercer continued. If Adrian Hale is found responsible for Victor Hale's death, his inheritance and voting rights will be transferred to Malcolm Hale, according to the succession clause. Someone whispered, so that's it. Another voice answered, he killed his own father. I slowly raised my head. My father's photograph was still staring at me. For 32 years, Victor Hale had been the most powerful man in my life. He had taught me that hesitation was weakness. That family was an obligation. That loyalty mattered more than comfort. And 3 days ago, he had called me into his office and said something I hadn't understood at the time. If I die suddenly, Adrian, don't trust the people who cry the loudest. I had thought it was an old man's paranoia. Now I wished I had asked him why. Mr. Mercer folded the document. The police have already received a sealed packet from Mr. Hale's private office. The room became silent. Malcolm's face changed. Only for a second. But I saw it. His lips parted. His shoulders stiffened. Then he recovered. Adrian, he said, turning toward me with practiced sadness, if you had nothing to do with Father's death, cooperate fully. We are all family. I almost laughed. Family. The word sounded obscene coming from him. Of course, I said. Malcolm blinked. Perhaps he had expected anger. Instead, I leaned back. I'll cooperate with everything. His expression tightened. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. No one approached me in the hallway. Employees who had spent years greeting me lowered their eyes as I passed. My father's assistant, Elena Cross, stood beside the elevator. She looked as if she wanted to speak. Mr. Hale. I stopped. Her hands trembled around a folder. Did my father tell you anything before he died? Elena swallowed. He told me that if the will was read before the investigation ended, I should give you this. She held out the folder. I took it. What is it? I don't know. You don't know? He sealed it himself. The elevator doors opened. Elena stepped inside, then looked back at me. There was one thing he said. What? She lowered her voice. He said, Adrian will understand when he sees the third page. The doors closed. I stared at the folder. There were only 3 pages inside. The first was a bank transfer. The second was a photograph of my father meeting someone in a parking garage 2 nights before his death. The third, I stopped breathing. It was a security access record. Victor Hale's private office had been opened at 11:47 p.m. on the night he died. The person who entered had used my biometric authorization, my fingerprint, my identity, my access code. I stared at the record until the letters blurred. Someone had entered my father's office pretending to be me. And if that person had killed Victor, the will had been designed to make me look guilty. A soft sound came from behind me. Interesting, isn't it? I turned. Malcolm stood at the end of the corridor. He smiled. You've always been clever, Adrian. My hand closed around the folder. What do you want? To save you. I didn't ask. You should. He walked closer. His expensive shoes made almost no sound against the marble floor. You're my nephew. I don't want to see you spend the rest of your life in prison. I studied his face. You seem remarkably confident I'll be arrested. His smile disappeared. For the first time, the mask slipped. Because the evidence is convincing. Then why are you worried? He said nothing. I stepped closer. Uncle Malcolm, if the evidence was really convincing, you wouldn't be standing here trying to persuade me to trust you. His jaw tightened. Then he whispered, "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Then explain it." "I can't, or you won't." He looked toward the security cameras. That was when I understood. He wasn't alone. Someone was watching. Malcolm leaned close enough that I could smell his cologne. "Destroy that folder." I didn't move. "If you don't," he whispered, "your father's death won't be the last tragedy in this family." The elevator doors opened behind him. He walked away without another word. I remained in the corridor. My pulse was steady now, strangely steady, because fear had finally been replaced by something colder. Clarity. Someone had murdered my father. Someone had framed me, and whoever had done it believed I would panic. They were wrong. I opened the folder again. The photograph of my father's final meeting caught my eye. I zoomed in with my phone. The person standing across from Victor was wearing a black coat. The face was hidden, but the reflection in the car window wasn't. I froze. I knew that watch. Silver casing, black leather strap, a tiny crack across the face. It belonged to Malcolm. I didn't confront him. That would have been the first mistake. Instead, I returned home. My apartment was silent when I entered. Too silent. I locked the door behind me and stood there for several seconds, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. I placed the folder on the kitchen counter. Then I checked every room. Bedroom, bathroom, study, balcony. Nothing appeared disturbed. But when I returned to the kitchen, the folder was no longer where I had left it. My blood went cold. It was on the floor. One page had been removed. The third page. The access record. I crouched slowly. Someone had entered my apartment, and they had known exactly what to take. I looked at the locked front door, then at the balcony. The balcony door was open. A thin curtain moved in the night wind. I walked toward it. On the railing was a cigarette, still warm. I didn't smoke. My father hadn't smoked in 20 years. Malcolm did. I almost smiled. Not because the situation was funny, because someone had just made a mistake. They thought they were cleaning up evidence. Instead, they had left me another piece. I photographed the cigarette. Then I called the only person I trusted enough to answer without asking unnecessary questions. "Daniel." A sleepy voice came through. "Adrian, it's nearly midnight. I need you to come over." A pause. "What's happened?" "My father was murdered." Silence. Then Daniel's voice became completely awake. "What?" "And someone's trying to frame me." "Are you sure?" "No." That answer surprised him. I looked at the cigarette. "But I'm sure someone wants me to believe I'm guilty." He arrived 20 minutes later. Daniel Wu had been my father's forensic accountant for 8 years and my closest friend for almost as long. He wasn't loyal because of money. That was precisely why I trusted him. He walked into the apartment, saw my face, and stopped joking. "What did they do?" I handed him the photograph. He studied it. "Malcolm, I think so." "You think?" "I know the watch. I don't know whether that proves he was there." Daniel nodded. "Then we don't accuse him." "Exactly." He looked at the remaining documents. "Where's the access record?" "Taken." "From here?" "Yes." He slowly looked around the apartment. "Then whoever took it knows you have the other pages." "Probably." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "This is bigger than an inheritance fight." "I know." He turned toward me. "What did Victor know?" I remembered my father's final words. "Don't trust the people who cry the loudest." "I don't know." Daniel stared at me. "Adrian, I really don't." For the first time that night, my composure cracked. I sat down. My father died, and the first thing his will did was accuse me. My voice sounded unfamiliar. I spent my entire life trying to become the son he wanted. Daniel remained silent. I gave up relationships, friends, my own company. I laughed bitterly. I even took responsibility for Malcolm's division when he nearly destroyed it. Daniel's expression softened. And now, I looked at the photograph. Now I think my father knew this was coming. Daniel sat opposite me. "What are you going to do?" I picked up my phone. "Nothing." He frowned. "Nothing. I'm going to let them believe I'm scared." "You're joking." "No." I opened the banking document. "There are transfers here from one of Victor's private accounts." Daniel's eyes narrowed. $3 million. Sent 6 weeks ago. To whom? I turned the page. The recipient was a company called North Star Holdings. Daniel went completely still. "You know them?" "Yes." "Ow." He looked at me. "Because North Star doesn't exist." The room seemed to shrink. "What do you mean?" It exists on paper, but there are no employees, no registered office, no active accounts that I can find. Then where did the money go? Daniel looked at the transaction again. That's the question. A message appeared on my phone. Unknown number. Stop looking. Another message arrived immediately. Your father died because he wouldn't. I stared at the screen. Daniel whispered, Adrian. A third message appeared. You can still survive if you leave the Hale family. I deleted nothing. I photographed everything. Then I smiled. Daniel looked at me as though I had lost my mind. Why are you smiling? Because they made one assumption. What? That I still want the Hale family. Daniel said nothing. I stood. For years, I thought my father's approval was worth everything. I looked toward the dark window. Tonight, I realized it isn't. The next morning, I went back to the Hale group. Reporters surrounded the entrance. Questions exploded around me. Mr. Hale, did you kill your father? Are you being investigated? Will you surrender your inheritance? Did Victor Hale discover financial crimes committed by you? I kept walking. Inside the lobby, Malcolm waited with two lawyers. His expression was sorrowful, almost perfect. Adrian, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, you should take a leave of absence. I stopped. Why? For your own protection. From whom? His smile faltered. The board. I looked around. Half the directors were already there. Then I said quietly, fine. Malcolm seemed surprised. I'll resign from the board. A murmur spread through the lobby. Daniel, standing behind me, stared. Malcolm's eyes brightened. You will? Yes. I removed my access card. But there's one condition. What? I want an independent audit of every private account connected to Victor Hale during the last 12 months. Malcolm's face went pale. Only for a moment. But this time, everyone saw it. I placed the access card on the reception desk. I have nothing to hide. Then I walked away. Behind me, Malcolm called my name. I didn't turn around. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away from my family because I had lost. I was walking away because I had finally understood something my father had spent years trying to teach me. Loyalty was not the same thing as surrender. And if someone had built a trap for me, I didn't need to tear it apart with my bare hands. I only needed to step aside. Sooner or later, the person holding the rope would pull it tight around his own neck. As I reached the parking garage, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Elena. Mr. Hale, I found something in your father's study. Another message followed. You need to see it before Malcolm does. Then came a photograph. A locked drawer. And beneath it, handwritten in Victor Hale's unmistakable handwriting. Adrian, if you are reading this, IT means Malcolm has already started the war. I stare at those words. Then I noticed the date written underneath. It was dated 2 weeks before my father's death. And below the date was one final sentence. The man who kills me is not the man you should fear. The drawer was still locked when I reached my father's study. Elena was waiting beside the desk, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She looked different from the woman who had handed me the folder the night before. More frightened, more exhausted. Daniel stood behind me. Where is it? I asked. Elena pointed toward the bottom drawer of Victor's desk. I found it while the police were cataloging his belongings. There was a false panel underneath the filing cabinet. I crouched. The drawer was made of dark walnut, polished so perfectly that the keyhole was almost invisible. I touched the metal. Cold. Do you have the key? Elena shook her head. Your father kept it somewhere on his person. Then how did you know the drawer existed? He told me. When? 3 days before he died. She hesitated. He told me never to open it unless you were being accused of his murder. I looked at her. And now I am. She nodded. Daniel examined the lock. This isn't a normal desk lock. How long? Give me 5 minutes. I stepped back. While he worked, my eyes wandered across the study. Everything looked exactly as it had when my father was alive. His reading glasses rested beside an unfinished financial report. A porcelain cup sat on the corner of a desk. There was even a small crease in the leather chair where he used to lean back whenever he was thinking. For a moment, I could almost hear his voice. Don't confuse being needed with being loved, Adrian. I had hated that sentence when he first said it. Now it hurt. Daniel finally clicked his tongue. Open. The drawer slid out. Inside was a black envelope. No name. No seal. Just one sentence written across the front. For my son, if I fail. My fingers hovered over it. Elena looked away. Daniel said nothing. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Adrian, if you're reading this, I have probably failed to protect you. My throat tightened. I continued. You will want to confront Malcolm. Don't. You will want to prove your innocence immediately. Don't. You will want the company. Don't. I stared at the last sentence. My father knew me too well. The letter continued. The Heir group has already become a battlefield. The person who controls the battlefield is not necessarily the person who wins it. 3 years ago, I discovered that someone inside the family had been moving company funds through shell corporations. I initially suspected Malcolm. I was wrong. I stopped. Daniel leaned closer. What? I handed him the letter. His eyes moved across the page. Then who? The next line answered us. The person closest to the money is not Malcolm. My stomach tightened. I read the next sentence. It is someone you trust. The room became completely silent. Elena whispered, who? I kept reading. Do not believe anyone who gives you a confession too easily. Do not believe anyone who asks you to hate Malcolm. And above all, do not return to the company until the board believes you have nothing left to lose. I looked up. What does that mean? Daniel frowned. Your father wanted you to disappear. No. I folded the letter. He wanted me to look powerless. Daniel's expression changed. You think this is deliberate? I think my father knew the only way to expose whoever was behind this was to make them believe I'd stopped fighting. Elena stepped forward. There is more. She pointed toward the envelope. A thin metallic object was hidden inside. A key, not for the drawer. A small silver key engraved with the number 17. Daniel took it carefully. Any idea what this opens? Elena shook her head. But I did. Vault 17. Daniel looked at me. The old private archive? Yes. The archive was located beneath Heir Group's original headquarters, a building my grandfather had purchased 40 years earlier. Few people knew it still existed. My father had once told me that the archive contained nothing valuable. I suddenly doubted him. My phone rang. Malcolm. I stared at the screen, then answered. Adrian. His voice was calm. You left the board meeting without saying goodbye. I didn't realize we were close enough for that. A pause. You're making a mistake. I've made many. You don't know what father left behind. My eyes moved toward the letter. Neither do you. Silence. That silence told me more than his words could have. Then Malcolm said, come to my office. No. You need answers. I'll find them myself. You think Daniel can protect you? Daniel looked at me. Malcolm continued. He can't. The call ended. I lowered the phone. Daniel's expression was grim. He knows about me. He knows about everyone. Elena suddenly spoke. There's something else. I turned. What? Your father had another visitor the night before he died. Who? She swallowed. Your mother. My body went still. My mother has been dead for 11 years. Elena's eyes filled with fear. I know. Nobody spoke. Then she corrected herself. It wasn't your mother. She opened a photograph. A woman stood outside Victor's office. Older, dark hair, same posture, same profile, but alive. Daniel stared. Who is she? Elena whispered. I don't know. I took the photograph. There was one thing written on the back. A name. Evelyn Cross. I looked at Elena. Cross. She nodded. My sister. I stared at her. You have a sister? She disappeared 18 years ago. Daniel's eyes narrowed. And your father met her the night before he died? Elena's voice broke. I thought she was dead. The room suddenly felt colder. Someone had been hiding for 18 years. My father had found her. And now my father was dead. I turned toward the door. Where are we going? Daniel asked. I held up the silver key. To Vault 17. Elena stepped forward. Take me with you. I studied her face. You don't know what's inside. She wiped away a tear. Neither do you. She looked at the photograph of her missing sister. But if Victor found Evelyn before he died, I need to know why. I nodded. Then stay close. As we left the study, I looked back one last time. My father's empty chair sat beneath the afternoon light. For years, I had believed he wanted me to inherit his empire. Now I understood. He had been trying to keep me alive. And somewhere beneath the city, he had left me the one thing he knew his enemies could never steal. A path to the truth. Vault 17 was behind a steel door hidden beneath the old Hale headquarters. The building had been abandoned for years. Dust covered the windows. The elevator groaned as it carried us underground. Elena stood beside me. She hadn't spoken since we arrived. Daniel was checking his phone. "No signal," he said. "Good." He looked at me. "You say that like we're breaking into a criminal hideout." "We might be." The elevator stopped. The doors opened. A narrow corridor stretched into darkness. At the end stood a steel door. Number 17. I inserted the key. Nothing happened. Daniel frowned. "Wrong key." "No." I looked at the keypad. 4 digits. A clue was engraved beneath it. "The day you stopped calling me father." I stared at the numbers. Elena looked confused. Daniel looked at me. "You know." I nodded slowly. "When I was 19. What happened?" "My father disowned me for 6 months." "Why?" I almost smiled. "I refused to sign a contract." "What contract?" "The acquisition of a small hospital." Daniel's eyes widened. "The St. Clair deal?" "Yes." I entered the date. The lock clicked. The steel door opened. Inside were dozens of boxes. Files. Hard drives. Photographs. Bank records. Everything was arranged with military precision. But one box sat alone on the central table. My name was written across it. I opened it. The first thing inside was a photograph. It showed my father standing beside Malcolm. But Malcolm wasn't looking at Victor. He was looking at someone behind the camera. Someone I recognized. I pulled out another photograph. Then another. The same person appeared in all of them. A woman. Evelyn Cross. Elena covered her mouth. She was alive. I continued searching. There were financial reports, company transfers, meeting schedules, and finally a medical report. Victor Hale had been diagnosed with severe heart disease 18 months earlier. Daniel stared at the document. He knew. I nodded. He knew he was dying. But his death was recorded as cardiac arrest. I looked at the report. "No." Daniel froze. "What?" "Look at the date." 3 months before his death, Victor's doctor had written, "Patient's condition is stable. No immediate risk of cardiac event." Daniel looked at me. So his death wasn't natural. I turned the page. There was a toxicology report. A substance had been found in Victor's blood. Not enough to kill him immediately. Enough to trigger a heart attack in someone with his condition. Elena whispered, "Poison." I nodded. My father's murder had just become a certainty. Then Daniel pulled out another file. "Adrian." I looked. His face was pale. "What?" He handed me a transfer record. The money sent to North Star Holdings wasn't Victor's money. It had come from a Hale Group account. But the authorization code belonged to... Daniel stopped. I took the document. My hands became cold. The authorization was mine. Again, my name, my credentials, my digital signature. Someone had spent years building a financial trail that led directly to me. Not just for my father's murder, for corporate theft, fraud, money laundering. If the investigation went deep enough, I could be blamed for millions. I sat down. Elena touched my shoulder. "Adrian." I pushed the papers away. "No." Daniel frowned. "What?" "There's something wrong." He looked at me. "If they wanted me arrested, why would they leave these records here?" Silence. I stood. "These documents are too obvious." Daniel's expression sharpened. "You think someone planted them?" "I think my father expected someone to find them." I searched the box again. At the bottom was another envelope. This one wasn't from my father. It was addressed to Malcolm. I opened it. Inside was a single page. "Malcolm, you were right about one thing. Adrian is easier to control when he thinks he has something to lose. But you made one mistake. You trusted the wrong person." No signature. Elena looked over my shoulder. "Who wrote that?" "I don't know." Daniel took the paper. "There may be fingerprints." "Don't touch it." He immediately dropped it back into the envelope. Then footsteps echoed in the corridor. All 3 of us froze. Someone was coming. Slowly. Measured. Not trying to hide. Elena whispered, "We should leave." The footsteps stopped outside. The vault door began to move. Daniel grabbed my arm. "Adrian." I looked at the doorway. A man's silhouette appeared. Then a familiar voice came through the darkness. "You shouldn't have come here." "Malcolm." I stepped forward. He entered alone. His expression was not angry. It was tired, almost defeated. He looked at Elena, then at Daniel, then at the open boxes. Finally, his eyes settled on me. You found it. I said nothing. He exhaled. I was hoping you wouldn't. You knew this place existed. Yes. Did my father tell you? No. Then how? Malcolm looked toward the shelves. Because I helped build it. My jaw tightened. You're involved. Yes. Elena stepped forward. You knew my sister was alive. Malcolm looked at her. I did. Her eyes filled with tears. Why didn't you tell me? Because she asked me not to. What? He looked away. Because your sister is the reason Victor died. The word struck the room like a gunshot. I stared at him. What did Evelyn do? Malcolm's face hardened. She discovered who was stealing from the company. Who? He looked directly at me. And for the first time since my father's death, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Your father's closest friend. I frowned. My father's closest friend died 10 years ago. Malcolm shook his head. No. He took a step closer. He didn't. The lights suddenly went out. Elena screamed. Something crashed behind us. Daniel shouted my name. Then I felt a sharp impact against the back of my head. The floor rose toward me. And the last thing I heard before darkness swallowed everything was Malcolm yelling, Adrian, don't trust me. I woke to the taste of blood in my mouth. For several seconds, I couldn't remember where I was. Then the pain behind my skull returned. The vault. The darkness. Malcolm's voice. Don't trust me. I opened my eyes. A single emergency light flickered above me. Daniel was kneeling beside the shelves, one hand pressed against his temple. Elena. No answer. I pushed myself upright. Daniel. He looked at me. I'm here. Where's Elena? His expression changed. She was gone when I woke up. I stood too quickly. The room tilted. Daniel caught my shoulder. Slow down. Who hit us? I don't know. Malcolm. He was gone too. I looked toward the vault entrance. The steel door was open, but nobody stood outside. My head throbbed as I walked toward it. There was blood on the floor. Not mine. I crouched. A small silver bracelet lay beside it. Elena's. My stomach tightened. She's been taken. Daniel picked up the bracelet. Or she left it deliberately. I looked at him. What? To tell us where she went. He turned the bracelet over. There was a tiny engraving inside. 3 letters. EC. Daniel frowned. Those aren't initials. What? Look closer. I did. The letters were actually numbers. 8 to 3. A code. I suddenly remembered the photographs in the vault. One of them had shown Evelyn standing outside an old railway station. Platform 8. Gate 3. We're going. Daniel grabbed my arm. Adrian, think. I am. This could be a trap. Everything is a trap. I pulled out my phone. Still no signal. Then I noticed something beneath the fallen table. A small recorder. I picked it up. The device was scratched but intact. There was one audio file. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the room. If you're hearing this, Adrian, the vault has been compromised. My chest tightened. His voice sounded weaker than I remembered. I need you to understand something. Malcolm is not your enemy. Daniel looked at me. I kept listening. He has lied to you because I ordered him to. I closed my eyes. Years ago, I discovered that someone was manipulating the Heir group from inside. I suspected Malcolm because the evidence pointed toward him. A pause. Then I discovered the evidence was manufactured. The recording crackled. The person responsible has access to our legal department, financial systems, medical records, and private security. Daniel whispered, That's impossible. My father's voice continued. He has spent 20 years preparing. I opened my eyes. 20 years. Who had been close enough to do that? Victor continued. Evelyn Cross discovered his identity. The recording stopped. I hit the device. Nothing. That's it. Daniel took it from me. Battery's dead. I stared at the recorder. My father's final message had given me another name without saying the name. 20 years. Access to everything. Someone close. I suddenly remembered the person Malcolm had mentioned. Your father's closest friend. I had assumed he meant someone currently alive. But my father's closest friend had supposedly died 10 years ago. Richard Vane. Victor's university friend. His first business partner. The man who had helped establish Heir Group. Officially, Richard had died in a private plane crash. There had been a funeral, a grave, a death certificate, everything. I looked at Daniel. Find Richard Vane. Daniel stared at me. He's dead. Find him. He hesitated, then pulled out his laptop. We left the vault. By the time we reached the old railway station, rain had started falling. The platform was nearly empty. A man in a gray coat stood beneath the awning. I stopped. He raised his face. He was older, much older, but I knew him, not from photographs, from my father's study, from a portrait hanging beside Victor's desk. Richard Vane, alive. He looked at me for several seconds and said quietly, "You have your father's eyes." I walked toward him. "You're supposed to be dead." He smiled sadly. "I know." Daniel stepped beside me. "Where's Elena?" Richard's expression hardened. "She came here because she wanted answers." "Where is she?" "Safe." I didn't believe him. "Take me to her." Richard shook his head. "You're not ready." I grabbed his coat. "Don't tell me what I'm ready for." He didn't fight back. Instead, he looked at me with something close to pity. "Your father spent his last year trying to keep you away from this." "My father is dead." "I know, and I'm being framed for his murder." "I know." "Then stop speaking in riddles." Richard's eyes moved toward Daniel. "You brought him?" "Yes." "Good." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. "Your father said you would need this." I took it. My name was written on the front. Inside was a photograph. It showed Victor, Richard, Evelyn, and another man. The fourth man's face had been scratched out. I turned it over. There was a date, 21 years ago, and one sentence. "We made him rich. We should have realized we were making him powerful." I looked up. "Who is the fourth man?" Richard didn't answer. "Who?" He finally said, "Samuel Reed." Daniel went pale. I recognized the name. Samuel Reed was Heir Group's current chief legal counsel, my father's most trusted lawyer, the man who had read the will, the man who had announced the evidence against me, the man who knew every clause of my father's estate. I stared at Richard. "You're saying Samuel framed me?" "No." He looked toward the rain. "I'm saying you should ask yourself why Samuel was the first person to know your father was dead." A train thundered past the station. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Daniel's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. His face drained of color. "What?" He turned it toward me. It was a news alert. Heir Group Board approves emergency succession plan. Below it was another headline. Malcolm Hale appointed acting chairman. And beneath that, police issue warrant for Adrian Hale in Victor Hale murder investigation. I stared at the screen. Richard quietly said, "They moved faster than I expected." I looked at him. "Why?" "Because someone wants the company before you can prove you're innocent." I folded the photograph. "Then let them take it." Richard frowned. "What?" "I don't want the company." Daniel stared at me. "Adrian." I looked toward the rain. "I want the person who killed my father." Richard's expression changed. For the first time, he smiled. "Now you sound like Victor." I shook my head. "No." I looked at the warrant on Daniel's phone. "I don't want to become him." We didn't return to the Hale Group. We went underground. Richard took us to an apartment above an abandoned bookstore on the eastern edge of the city. It belonged to Evelyn. She was sitting by the window when we entered. Alive, uninjured. Elena was beside her. The moment Elena saw me, she stood. "Adrian." I crossed the room. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No." I looked at Evelyn. She didn't move. For 18 years, she had lived as a ghost. Now she was finally sitting in front of me. "You knew my father?" "Yes." "You knew Richard?" "Yes." "You knew who was stealing from the company?" Her eyes lowered. "Yes." "Then why didn't you tell anyone?" She looked at Elena. "Because the last time I tried, your father almost died." I said nothing. She continued. "I was 29 when I discovered the accounts." She placed a folder on the table. Money was being diverted through companies that existed only on paper. North Star. She looked at me sharply. "You found it?" "Yes." Evelyn nodded. North Star wasn't created to steal money. Daniel frowned. "Then what was it created for?" "To hide ownership." She opened the folder. Inside were old corporate records. Shares. Trusts. Holding companies. Names. One name appeared repeatedly. Samuel Reed. But beneath it was another. Victor Hale. I stared. "My father." "He wasn't stealing." Evelyn's voice softened. "He was buying back shares secretly." "From whom?" "Samuel." I looked at Richard. He nodded. "Your father discovered Samuel had been accumulating voting rights through shell companies. Daniel whispered. That means Samuel was trying to take control of Heir Group. Exactly, Evelyn said. And my father fought him? For years. Then why did Samuel remain his lawyer? Because Victor needed to know what Samuel was doing. I stared at the documents. The pieces were finally beginning to connect. Samuel hadn't simply wanted money. He wanted control. But one question remained. Why frame me? Evelyn answered immediately. Because you were Victor's successor. I shook my head. I rejected the succession. Publicly. She pushed another document toward me. I looked at it. A board resolution. It named me as the sole person with authority to challenge the ownership structure of North Star Holdings. My signature was at the bottom. I stared. I never signed this. I know. Evelyn looked at me. Samuel forged it. Daniel took the paper. Then he can be prosecuted. Not yet. Richard spoke quietly. Because the original document is stored inside the Heir Group's legal archive. I looked at him. And Samuel controls the archive. Yes. I leaned back. The answer was obvious. We needed the original. But I wasn't going to storm into the company. I had already resigned. I had already surrendered my board seat. Let Malcolm celebrate. Let Samuel believe the danger had disappeared. I smiled. Daniel noticed. That expression worries me. Good. I stood. We're going to give them exactly what they want. Evelyn frowned. What? Me disappearing? The next morning, I released a statement through my lawyer. I announced that I would not contest the investigation. I would not seek control of Heir Group. I would not challenge Malcolm's appointment. And I would temporarily withdraw from public life. The media exploded. Some called me guilty. Some called me cowardly. Others said I had abandoned my father's legacy. Malcolm held a press conference that afternoon. He appeared beside Samuel Reed. His expression was solemn. We believe Adrian Hale needs time to reflect, Malcolm said. Samuel stood behind him, perfectly composed. I watched the broadcast from Evelyn's apartment. Daniel sat beside me. You see his face? Yes. He isn't worried? No. Why? Because he thinks he's won. On television, Samuel leaned toward the microphone. Victor Hale's family deserves peace. I almost laughed. The same man who had written the will accusing me was now speaking about peace. Then he said something that made me sit upright. The company will cooperate fully with investigators. Daniel paused the broadcast. What? I pointed at Samuel. He just made a mistake. Ow! He said investigators. So, he didn't say police. Daniel frowned. I explained. The legal archive is under board protection. Police can't enter without a specific warrant. So Samuel is expecting someone to investigate the corporate records. Daniel's eyes widened. He's going to move them. Exactly. We waited. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then, at 2:13 a.m., Richard received a message. A security guard at the old headquarters had seen 2 men moving boxes from the legal archive. Daniel immediately stood. Now. I shook my head. No. He stared at me. They're moving evidence. Let them. What? I looked at the security footage Richard had obtained. One of the men carrying the boxes was Samuel's assistant. The other was Malcolm. They're taking the bait. I pointed to the timestamp. Those boxes aren't going to a warehouse. How do you know? Because Malcolm is carrying them himself. Daniel watched the screen. He's not stupid. No. I smiled. He's desperate. And desperate people rarely check whether the person chasing them is actually behind them. I called the security guard. Did you see where they went? Yes. Tell me. They took the boxes into the private basement. I looked at Daniel. Basement? There's no basement listed on the building plans. Exactly. We left immediately. But when we arrived, the basement door was already open. Inside was a single desk. On it sat the boxes. All of them. Unopened. Daniel looked confused. This is too easy. I agreed. Then I saw the paper on the desk. 1 sentence. You wanted the truth. Here it is. I picked it up. A second line appeared underneath. Ask your friend Daniel Wu why Victor paid him $500,000. I slowly turned toward Daniel. He had gone completely pale. Adrian. I held up the paper. Explain. He didn't answer. For the first time since my father's death, Daniel couldn't meet my eyes. And suddenly the room felt colder than the vault. Daniel did not speak. For several seconds, The only sound in the basement was the faint hum of an old ventilation system. I kept the paper between us. $500,000. Victor had paid him. My closest friend. The man who had stood beside me when the police questioned me. The man who had helped me uncover North Star. The man who had warned me not to trust anyone. My fingers tightened around the paper. Explain. Daniel swallowed. I can. Then do it. It wasn't what you think. I gave a short, humorless laugh. That's what everyone says before they tell you what you should think. His face tightened. Victor paid me because I was investigating North Star. Without telling me? Yes. Why? Because he didn't trust the board. I stared at him. You were working for my father. I was protecting you. By lying to me? Daniel lowered his eyes. I knew if I told you, you'd confront him. Maybe I should have. No. His voice sharpened. You would have confronted Samuel. And you would have died. The words silenced me. Daniel took a breath. Victor discovered someone was monitoring your communications. He believed Samuel had access to your phone, your emails, your financial records. He wanted me to trace the money without using the company's systems. He reached into his coat and pulled out an old bank statement. The $500,000 wasn't personal. I looked at the document. It was a consulting payment. The account had been closed months ago. Below the transaction was a handwritten note. Emergency protection for Adrian Hale. I looked at Daniel. Why didn't you tell me? Because your father made me promise. You always hated secrets. I hated what secrets did to you. I said nothing. He continued. The night Victor died, he called me. My head lifted. What did he say? He said he had finally identified the person behind North Star. Samuel? Daniel shook his head. No. Then who? I don't know. I stared at him. You don't know? He didn't tell me the name. Why? Because someone was listening. Daniel took out his phone. I heard a door open while we were speaking. Victor told me to erase everything and disappear. He looked toward the boxes. Then he said something strange. What? If Adrian asks you about the $500,000, tell him only when the wrong person has already found it. I glanced at the paper. The wrong person found it. Yes. Which means this was planted. Daniel nodded. I looked around the basement. The boxes. The desk. The note. Everything had been arranged for us. Someone wanted me to distrust Daniel. And someone knew exactly which wound to press. I folded the paper. I believe you. Daniel looked startled. You do? No. His expression fell. I believe that you're telling me something you believe is true. He nodded slowly. That is enough for now. A sound came from above. Footsteps. We both froze. 3 sets. Someone was coming down. Daniel reached for the lights. I shook my head. Leave them on. The basement door opened. Malcolm entered. Samuel followed. Neither looked surprised to see us. Samuel smiled. Adrian. I stared at him. You planted the note. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Daniel. Did he tell you about the payment? I said nothing. Samuel's smile widened. Good. Malcolm looked uncomfortable. This isn't what we agreed. Samuel turned toward him. Stay out of it. Malcolm's jaw tightened. That was the first time I realized something important. Malcolm wasn't Samuel's partner. He was his subordinate. Samuel walked toward the boxes. You have been remarkably difficult to predict, Adrian. I've done nothing. Exactly. He touched one of the boxes. You resigned. You abandoned your claim. You stopped defending yourself. I smiled. You sound disappointed. I am. Why? Because I expected Victor's son to behave like Victor. I looked directly into his eyes. I'm not my father. No. Samuel's voice became colder. That is why you were easier to frame. Daniel stepped forward. Where's the original North Star ledger? Samuel glanced at him. You're still trying to be useful. Daniel's face hardened. I know what you did. Samuel laughed quietly. You know what Victor allowed you to know. Then he looked at me. Your father spent 20 years building a prison around himself. Why? Because he was afraid. Of you. Samuel smiled. Of what he had created. He opened one of the boxes. Inside were old company ledgers. Victor and Richard built Heir Group using money they borrowed from people they shouldn't have trusted. I frowned. That's impossible. Is it? Samuel pulled out a document. Your grandfather's company was nearly bankrupt. I looked at the figures, the dates, the signatures, the loans. This is... Your family empire was built on stolen capital. No. Samuel nodded. Victor spent decades covering it up. I looked at Malcolm. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Samuel continued. Richard wanted to expose it. Victor wanted to bury it. Evelyn discovered the truth. That's why she disappeared. I looked at Daniel. He was staring at the documents. Why kill Victor? Samuel's expression changed. Because he decided to confess. The room went still. He was going to give the authorities everything. Samuel looked almost offended. He was going to destroy the company to save himself. And you killed him. No. Samuel stepped closer. Your father was already dying. I remember the toxicology report. You poisoned him. I gave him a choice. What choice? Samuel's voice dropped. Protect his family and remain silent, or tell the truth and watch everyone lose everything. I felt something cold settle inside me, and he chose to confess. Yes. So you killed him. Samuel smiled faintly. I didn't have to. He pointed at the boxes. Your father had already prepared the evidence. Then he looked at Malcolm. Your uncle finished the job. I turned. Malcolm's face had gone white. What? Samuel spoke calmly. Malcolm was the one who entered Victor's office that night. Malcolm shook his head. You said nobody would know. I stared at him. You were there. Malcolm's eyes met mine. Tears appeared. I didn't kill him. Samuel laughed. Of course you didn't. Malcolm stepped backward. I only took the documents. I could barely breathe. You were in his office. Yes. After he was poisoned? Yes. Why? Malcolm covered his face. Because Samuel told me Victor was going to expose me. I understood. The access record. My fingerprints. Malcolm had used my credentials. But he hadn't killed Victor. He had helped the killer without knowing it. Samuel turned toward me. Now you understand. I stared at him. You framed me because Malcolm needed a scapegoat. No. Samuel's eyes hardened. I framed you because your father trusted you with something I could never obtain. What? The voting trust. My heart stopped. What voting trust? Samuel smiled. Your father transferred controlling authority to you 6 months ago. I looked at Daniel. He nodded slowly. That explains the North Star records. Samuel stepped closer. You weren't just the heir. He leaned toward me. You were the only person who could legally dismantle everything I built. Then the basement lights suddenly went out. A woman's voice came through the darkness. Then perhaps you should have killed him sooner. Evelyn. The emergency lights flickered on. She stood at the top of the stairs. Behind her were 2 police officers, and in her hand was a recording device. Samuel's smile disappeared. Evelyn raised the device. Everything you said tonight has been recorded. No one moved. Then one of the officers said, Samuel Reed, you're under arrest. Samuel looked at me. For the first time, I saw genuine fear. Samuel did not resist. That frightened me more than if he had. He simply raised his hands. The officers approached. Malcolm remained frozen beside the boxes. One officer looked at him. And you? Malcolm closed his eyes. I'll cooperate. He turned toward me. There was no arrogance left in his face. Only exhaustion. Adrian, I waited. I never wanted you blamed. You still helped. I know. Why? He looked at the floor. Because I was afraid. I nodded. That doesn't excuse it. No. He looked up. I don't expect forgiveness. The officers led him away. Samuel passed me last. He stopped. You think this ends with my arrest? I looked at him. No. His expression sharpened. You should be careful. I am. You don't know what your father left behind. I smiled. Neither did you. For the first time, Samuel looked uncertain. Then he was taken away. The basement became silent. Daniel exhaled. It's over. I shook my head. No. I looked at the boxes. It's only over for Samuel. Evelyn walked downstairs. You're right. She placed the recorder on the table. There is still the matter of your father. I looked at her. What do you mean? She opened another file. Inside was a medical report, different from the one we'd found before. This was hidden by Victor's personal physician. I read it. My father's toxicology results have been altered. The original report showed the substance in his blood, but there was another note. Dose insufficient to cause death. I looked up. Then what killed him? Evelyn answered quietly. His heart. I frowned. What? The poison triggered the attack. She pointed to the next page. But Victor's heart condition was severe enough that even without the poison, he may have died soon. I stared at the report. So Samuel caused his death. Yes, but he didn't necessarily need to. No. Evelyn's eyes softened. Your father knew that. I remembered the recording. If you're hearing this, I have probably failed to protect you. He had known. He had accepted that he might die. Not because he had given up, because he had been trying to make sure I survived what came after him. I sat down. For the first time since his funeral, grief came without anger. My eyes burned. I hated him. Evelyn sat beside me. You were his son. He made me feel like nothing I did was enough. She looked at me. He regretted that. How do you know? Because I was there when he wrote the letter. I looked at her. He told me he didn't know how to be a father. That broke something inside me. I looked down. A tear fell onto the old document. I wanted him to say that. Evelyn didn't touch me. She simply stayed beside me. Sometimes silence was kinder than comfort. 3 weeks later, the Heir Group held an emergency shareholder meeting. This time, I entered through the front doors. No reporters were shouting. No police waited outside. The investigation had changed everything. Samuel's accounts had been frozen. The shell companies had been exposed. Malcolm had resigned from the board and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. And the documents found in the basement had established that I had been framed. The chairman's seat was empty. The board waited. I stood before them. Mr. Mercer was there. Daniel sat in the back. Evelyn remained outside the room. I looked around. For years, this room had represented my future. Now it looked like a place I had finally outgrown. Mr. Mercer cleared his throat. Adrian, under the voting trust transferred to you by Victor, you now have controlling authority. Everyone waited. You can appoint a new chairman. I nodded. I know. Do you intend to take the position? No. A murmur spread. One director stood. Then who will lead the company? I placed a folder on the table. An independent management team. Another director frowned. You're giving up control? Yes. Why? I looked at the empty chairman's seat. Because my father spent 20 years trying to own everything. I paused. I don't want his prison. Nobody spoke. I'll keep my lawful shares. But I won't run this company. Mr. Mercer stared at me. Victor wanted you to inherit it. I know. Wouldn't refusing dishonor him? I shook my head. No. I looked toward the photograph of Victor on the wall. I think he would finally understand. The board approved the transition. The Heir Group survived. But it was no longer the empire my grandfather had built. The hidden ownership structure was dismantled. Several subsidiaries were sold. Employees who had been threatened under Samuel's system were reinstated. The company paid restitution where it could. And Malcolm's name disappeared from the boardroom. Not because I had demanded it, because his own choices had made it impossible for him to stay. One evening, months later, I visited my father's grave. The cemetery was quiet. Wind moved through the trees. I stood before the stone. I found them. I almost laughed. You were right about Malcolm. I put my hands into my coat pockets. But you were wrong about one thing. I looked at his name. You didn't fail to protect me. The words were difficult. You taught me how to protect myself. I remained there for a while. Then I placed the final copy of his letter against the stone. I won't become you. I stepped back. I'll become someone you didn't know how to be. A man who could love without controlling. A man who could leave without hatred. A man who could protect people without sacrificing himself. When I turned to leave, Daniel was waiting near the cemetery gate. You ready? I nodded. What now? I looked toward the road. Something smaller. He smiled. That's vague. It's supposed to be. We walked away together. Behind us, the cemetery disappeared into the evening fog. The Heir name remained. The company remained. The consequences remained. But I no longer belonged to them. And somewhere beneath all the grief, I finally understood the real meaning of my father's final warning. The person who killed him had never been the greatest danger. The greatest danger was becoming the kind of man who believed losing an empire meant losing himself. I had almost become that man. I didn't. And that was the one inheritance I chose to keep. The first thing I bought after leaving Heir Group was a desk. Not an office. Not a penthouse. Not another company with my name engraved across the entrance. Just a desk. It stood beside a wide window in a small two-room office above a bakery on Mercer Street. The paint on the walls was uneven. The elevator made a sound like it was dying every time it moved, and the heating system worked only when it felt like cooperating. I loved it. Daniel stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. You spent 40 minutes choosing a desk. I wanted a good one. You're running an investment advisory firm. Eventually, you have 3 clients. 4. He raised an eyebrow. Who is the 4th? I pointed toward the bakery downstairs. The owner. Daniel laughed. The sound felt strange, not because it was unfamiliar, because it had been a long time since laughter had existed in my life without something dark waiting behind it. I took the coffee from him. What did the lawyer say? Your father's estate is almost settled. Almost. There is one remaining matter. I looked at him. What? The private trust. I sighed. Of course. There was always one more door my father had left locked. Daniel placed a folder on the desk. Victor transferred 20% of his personal assets into a charitable trust before he died. I opened it. The beneficiary list surprised me. Employees, former employees, several families of people who had lost their jobs during the company's restructuring, a children's hospital, a scholarship fund, and one name I didn't recognize, the Vane Foundation. I looked at Daniel. Richard? Yes. Why will my father leave money to him? Maybe ask him. I closed the folder. Richard had disappeared after Samuel's arrest. Not literally. He had simply returned to the life he had built for himself and refused every invitation to become involved in Heir Group again. I understood him. Some wars were better left behind. I called him. He answered on the 4th ring. Adrian, did you know about the trust? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't mine to tell. I smiled. You and my father had the same irritating habit. He learned it from me. I sat back. What was the trust for? There was a pause. Victor wanted to repair what he had broken. The word stayed with me. Did he ever tell you he was sorry? Richard exhaled softly. No. I looked out the window. He wasn't good at that. No. Another pause. But he tried. I looked down. Ow. He once asked me what I thought his greatest mistake was. What did you say? I told him it was believing money could replace time. My fingers tightened around the phone. And what did he say? Richard laughed quietly. He said, I know. The call ended shortly afterward. I remained at the desk. Daniel watched me. You're thinking about him. I am. You still angry? I considered the question. Yes. Daniel nodded. That might be healthy. I also miss him. That can be healthy too. I smiled. You're becoming annoyingly wise. I've been wise for years. You've been lucky for years. He laughed. Then he placed another file on my desk. Speaking of things you aren't going to enjoy. I opened it. A lawsuit, filed by 3 former Heir executives. They claimed I had unlawfully taken control of the voting trust and caused financial losses by restructuring the company. I stared at the first page. They're suing me? Yes. Why? They're trying to recover money they lost when their contracts were terminated. Do they have a case? Barely. Then why file? Daniel shrugged. People who lose power often confuse litigation with revenge. I closed the folder. Let them. He looked surprised. That's it. I don't need to destroy them. What are you going to do? Defend myself. And continue building. That became my new rule. I stopped reacting to every problem as if it were an emergency. I stopped answering calls simply because someone had once expected me to. I stopped explaining my choices to people who had already decided they didn't respect them. For the first time in my life, I learned the difference between responsibility and obligation. Responsibility meant keeping my promises. Obligation meant allowing other people to decide what I owed them. I chose responsibility, and I refused the rest. 3 months passed. The small investment firm began to grow. We specialized in helping struggling family businesses restructure without destroying the people who depended on them. It wasn't glamorous. There were no television interviews, no magazine covers, no enormous headquarters. But every week, someone walked into our office with a business that was 1 bad month away from collapse. And every week, we helped them find a way forward. One afternoon, a young woman named Clara sat across from me. Her father had died unexpectedly. She had inherited a manufacturing company buried under debt. I don't know anything about running a company, she said. I looked at the financial statements. You don't need to know everything. She looked confused. What I need to know? When to ask for help. Her eyes filled with tears. My family says I should sell. Do you want to? No. Then don't. But what if I fail? I lean back. Then you learn why. She stared at me. My father always said failure was shameful. I almost smiled. Your father was wrong. She looked surprised. Failure isn't shameful. I pointed toward the documents. Refusing to learn from it is. She nodded slowly. By the end of the month, Clara had retained her company. By the end of the year, she had hired 20 new employees. She sent us a photograph of the factory floor. Everyone was smiling. I printed the photograph. It joined the others on my wall. Not awards. Not newspaper articles. People. That was the success I wanted. One evening, Elena visited the office. She had changed since the investigation. Her hair was shorter. Her shoulders were straighter. She no longer carried the expression of someone waiting for bad news. She placed a small box on my desk. What is this? Something I should have given you months ago. I opened it. Inside was my father's old fountain pen. I recognized it immediately. He used this every day. Elena nodded. He asked me to give it to you if you ever build a life outside Heir Group. I stared at the pen. He planned for that. He hoped for it. I looked up. What else did he say? Elena smiled sadly. He said, if Adrian ever stops trying to become the son I wanted, maybe he'll finally become the man I was proud of. I couldn't speak. Elena didn't wait for a response. She simply touched my shoulder and left. I remained alone. The office was quiet. Traffic moved below the window. The bakery owner shouted at someone over an order. A delivery truck honked twice. Ordinary life. Beautifully ordinary. I picked up the pen. For years, I had believed my father's approval was something I had to earn. Now I understood. It was something he had been trying, badly and too late, to give. I opened my desk drawer. Inside was a blank sheet of paper. I began writing. Not a business plan. Not a contract. A letter. Dad. I stopped. Then continued. I don't forgive everything. My hand trembled. But I don't need to. I looked at the words. That was the truth. Forgiveness was not a debt. Neither was hatred. Sometimes healing meant refusing to carry either. I folded the letter. I didn't know where I would put it. Maybe nowhere. Maybe one day at his grave. For now, it stayed in the drawer. The next morning, I received a call from the hospital. The Heir Scholarship Fund had opened its first children's rehabilitation center. They wanted me at the opening ceremony. I almost declined. Then I remember my father's trust. I went. Hundreds of children and their families filled the courtyard. No one cared about the Heir Group scandal. No one asked about Samuel. No one mentioned Malcolm. A little boy approached me holding a paper airplane. He looked up. Are you Mr. Adrian? Yes. My mom says you helped build this. I smiled. Lots of people did. He held out the paper airplane. Then this is for you. I accepted it. Thank you. He ran away. I unfolded the plane. Written across the wing in crooked blue letters were 4 words. Don't forget to fly. I laughed. For the first time, I laughed without bitterness. And somewhere inside me, something finally became quiet. The peace did not last forever. I knew it wouldn't. Peace was not a permanent condition. It was a choice you kept making. 6 months after the trial, Malcolm asked to see me. I almost refused. Then I agreed. We met in a small cafe far from the Heir headquarters. He looked older. Not dramatically. Just enough that I could see how much the past had taken from him. He sat across from me. You look well. I am. He nodded. I heard your firm is doing well. It is. You always were good with people. I almost smiled. That isn't what Father used to say. No. He looked down. I've been thinking about that. About what? Everything I did. I didn't interrupt. I blamed you for years. Why? Because Victor trusted you. I stared at him. I thought you were taking my place. I never wanted your place. I know that now. He looked toward the window. I didn't then. A waitress brought coffee. Neither of us touched it. I've accepted the consequences, Malcolm said. I heard. I'll probably lose the house. I said nothing. He looked at me. You could stop it. No. He nodded. I thought you might say that. I can't protect you from consequences you chose. His eyes lowered. Understand. We sat quietly. Then he asked, do you hate me? I considered it. No. He looked surprised. I don't think about you enough to hate you. The words hurt him. I could see it, but I didn't take them back. That was another thing I had learned. Honesty didn't have to be cruel. It just had to be true. Malcolm nodded. Fair enough. He stood. Before leaving, he placed an envelope on the table. What is that? Something I found in Father's safe. I looked at him. You should have it. He walked away. I opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph of me at 17. I was standing beside my father at a company event. I barely remember the night. On the back, my father had written, "He thinks I'm disappointed in him. I have no idea how to tell him I am afraid of losing him." I stared at the words. Then I put the photograph away. Not because it changed the past. It didn't. But because sometimes understanding came after forgiveness had become unnecessary. A year passed. The lawsuit against me collapsed. Samuel Reed received a lengthy prison sentence after investigators uncovered additional financial crimes. Malcolm cooperated fully and accepted responsibility for his role in the cover-up. The Heir Group survived under independent leadership. Its profits fell, then stabilized, then slowly grew. But it became a different company. Smaller, cleaner, less obsessed with control. I kept my shares. I never returned to the board. I never attended another shareholder meeting unless absolutely necessary. My life became something I had never imagined. Quiet, work, friends, long walks, books I had postponed for years, Sunday dinners with Daniel, occasional arguments, occasional laughter, and mornings when I woke up without wondering who was trying to destroy me. One winter evening, Daniel came into my office carrying 2 envelopes. One is good news, and the other, bad news. Which first? Good. He handed me the first. Our firm had been selected to advise a national network of small manufacturing companies. A major contract. I smiled. That's good. Very. And the bad. He handed me the second envelope. It was from the Heir estate. I opened it. Inside was a final document. The private voting trust had expired. My remaining shares had been transferred into the charitable foundation. I stared. Daniel read over my shoulder. You gave them away? I didn't. My father's signature was at the bottom. The transfer had been prepared before his death. He had planned to give up the last portion of his personal control. Even if I had inherited it, I would eventually have lost it. Not through law, through choice. I leaned back. He really planned everything. Daniel smiled. Not everything. What? He didn't plan you. I looked at him. He thought he could. Daniel shook his head. No. He pointed toward the window. That's the one thing you finally did yourself. I looked outside. Snow had begun falling. Tiny white flakes moved through the city lights. For a moment, I remembered the basement. The accusation. The funeral. The will. The photograph. The fear. The anger. The years of trying to earn a place in a family that had made me believe love was something measured in sacrifice. All of it felt far away. Not erased. Just distant. I opened my desk drawer. The fountain pen was still there. So was my unfinished letter. I took both home that night. At midnight, I sat beside the window and finished writing. Dad, you were wrong about many things. So was I. You thought protecting me meant preparing me to survive your world. I thought loving you meant surviving it. We were both wrong. I don't need your company. I don't need your name. I don't need to prove that I deserve to be your son. I already was. I stopped, then added one final line. I hope wherever you are, you're finally at peace. I folded the letter. The next morning, I took it to his grave. The cemetery was covered in snow. I placed the letter beneath the stone. Then I stood there for a while. No speeches, no dramatic promises, just silence. When I finally turned around, Daniel was waiting near the gate. You ready? I smiled. Yes. We walked toward the car. Halfway there, I stopped. Daniel looked back. What? I glanced at my father's grave one last time. Then I said, nothing. And for once, it really was nothing. No unfinished argument. No question demanding an answer. No family war waiting behind the next door. Just an old grave. A cold morning. And a life that belonged entirely to me. I had once believed the worst thing that could happen to a man was losing his inheritance. I had been wrong. The worst thing was inheriting a life he never wanted. The best thing was having the courage to put it down and walk toward something smaller, something quieter, something real. I drove away from the cemetery without looking back. Not because I had forgotten where I came from, because I finally knew where I was going. 3 years after my father's death, I received a letter with no return address. It arrived on a Monday morning. I almost threw it away. Then I noticed the handwriting. I knew it immediately. Samuel Reed. My fingers stopped moving. For 3 years, his name had appeared only in legal documents and newspaper archives. I had no desire to hear from him. But curiosity is sometimes the last weakness left after fear has disappeared. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet. Adrian, I have no right to ask anything of you. But there is one thing you should know. Your father did not die believing he had won. He died believing you would. I read the sentence twice. Below was an address. A prison visiting room. I folded the letter. I didn't go. For a week, I ignored it. Then another envelope arrived. This time, there was a photograph. My father, Richard, Evelyn, and Samuel, all four stood outside the original Heir factory. On the back, Samuel had written, "Ask Richard why Victor really chose you." I stared at the photograph. I had already learned enough to know that Samuel was dangerous even from behind bars. A lie could travel just as far as a person. I called Richard. He answered after several rings. "You received it." I frowned. "You knew?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because some truths are useless until you're ready for them." I disliked the answer. "I'm ready now." There was a long silence. Then Richard said, "Come to the old factory." I drove there that afternoon. The building had been converted into a community workshop. Children were learning robotics in one room. A group of young entrepreneurs were using the old conference hall. People had turned the place into something alive. Richard was waiting near the original office. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him. "You kept the building." "I changed it." "That sounds like something my father would have hated." Richard smiled. "He would have hated the cost." We walked inside. Dust covered the old photographs on the walls. I stopped before one. My father was standing beside me. I was 17. He had one hand on my shoulder. Neither of us was smiling. Richard followed my gaze. "He loved you." I didn't answer. "You don't have to defend him." "I know. He wasn't a good man in every way." "I know. But he tried to become better." I looked at him. "Why?" "Because of you." I waited. Richard opened a cabinet. Inside was a thick notebook. He handed it to me. "This is your father's." I opened it. Most pages were filled with financial notes. Then I found something different. A list of names. Employees. Their families. Scholarship recipients. People my father had quietly helped. At the bottom was a note. "If Adrian ever leaves the company, make sure these people are protected." I stared at it. He knew I'd leave. Richard nodded. "He hoped you would." I closed the notebook. "Then why make me his successor?" "Because he knew the company would come for you." "What does that mean?" Richard sat down. "Victor believed the only way to protect you was to put you in the position where everyone would have to reveal themselves." I frowned. "He used me as bait." "Yes." The words hurt. Even after everything, they hurt. "My father made me a target." "He did. And you think that's acceptable?" "No." Richard's answer came immediately. That was his greatest failure. I looked at him. He knew how to protect an empire. Richard's eyes lowered. But he didn't know how to protect a son. The room became quiet. I closed the notebook. "Then what does Samuel want me to know?" "Eats outside." Samuel wasn't the first person to betray Victor. I stared at him. "Who was?" Richard looked toward the old window. I didn't move. "What?" 23 years ago, I borrowed money from a private investment group to help Victor keep Heir Group alive. You told me the company was built on clean capital. I lied. "Why?" "Because the investors demanded control." He paused. I agreed. My jaw tightened. "And my father?" "He found out." "What happened?" "Victor forced me out." "Then why did you come back?" "Because I regretted what I'd done." I looked at the photograph. "Samuel?" Richard nodded. Samuel was the investor's legal representative. That name again. "He didn't want control at first," Richard said. "He wanted leverage." "And he got it." "Yes." I understood. Samuel had spent decades turning one debt into another, one contract into another, one secret into another, until the company was trapped. And Evelyn, she discovered everything, which is why she disappeared. Richard nodded. I thought about Elena, her sister, her 18 lost years. Why did my father tell me? Because he thought you would destroy yourself trying to fix it. I looked at the notebook. He was right. Richard smiled sadly. You've always had that weakness. What weakness? You care too much. I laughed softly. That sounds like an insult. It becomes one when you forget yourself. I closed the notebook. So what happens now? Nothing. I looked at him. Nothing. You already escaped the trap. I shook my head. No. Richard frowned. I didn't escape. I placed the notebook on the table. I changed the rules. That evening, I returned to my office. The letter from Samuel was still in my desk drawer. I read it once more. Your father died, believing you would win. I finally understood what he meant. Winning had never been about defeating Samuel, or taking Heir Group, or proving my innocence. Winning had been refusing to become what the people around me expected. I had survived without inheriting their cruelty. That was enough. But there was one thing left. Samuel. Not because I wanted revenge, because there were still people carrying the consequences of what he had done. Former employees, families, small investors, people who had lost everything while men like Samuel protected themselves. I called Daniel. I need the old North Star files. He went silent. Why? Because we're not done. Yes. What are you planning? Nothing illegal. That wasn't my question. I smiled. I want to build a legal fund. For whom? Everyone Samuel hurt who never had enough money to fight back. Daniel was silent for several seconds. Then he laughed. You really can't leave this family behind, can you? I already did. Then why? Because leaving doesn't mean pretending it never happened. Daniel's voice softened. What do you need? Everything. That's a lot. I know. He sighed. Fine. I put down the phone. Outside, the city was glowing beneath the evening sky. For the first time, the Heir name didn't feel like a chain. It felt like a lesson. And lessons were meant to be carried forward, not inherited. 6 months later, the legal fund had helped 47 former employees. We never put my name on it. That was deliberate. The foundation was called the Heir Initiative. Richard objected to the name. I ignored him. You deserve some credit. I deserve none. You helped expose Samuel. So did you. Then we're both guilty. He laughed. It was the first time I'd ever heard him laugh without sadness. The initiative grew quickly. Former employees came forward. Old contracts surfaced. Other companies discovered similar shell structures. Samuel's influence reached far beyond Heir Group. The authorities reopened several investigations. People who had once been too afraid to speak finally did. I never testified publicly. I didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves. Consequences did the rest. One afternoon, I received a final letter from Samuel. This one was shorter. Adrian, I understand now. Your father was right about you. You were never going to become him. That was why I could never control you. I folded the letter. There was no anger in me, no satisfaction, just closure. I never answered. Some conversations didn't deserve another chapter. That evening, I went to the children's rehabilitation center my father had funded. The same place where a little boy had once given me a paper airplane. The center had grown. The courtyard was full of children. I found the boy sitting beneath a tree. He was older now. He recognized me immediately. Mr. Adrian. He ran toward me. I smiled. You got taller. He looked proud. My mom says I'm almost as tall as my teacher. That's serious progress. He laughed. Then he handed me another paper airplane. I unfolded it. This time, there were no words. Just a drawing. A house. A tree. 3 people standing together. I looked at him. Who's this? My family. And who's this? He pointed to the third figure. You. I laughed. I don't live with you. I know. He shrugged. You helped us. I looked at the drawing. Something inside me softened. For years, I had believed a family was something you inherited. A surname. A bloodline. A house. A company. Now I understood. Family could also be the people who stayed when they had no obligation to. The people who helped you without asking what you could give them. The people who didn't make love conditional. Daniel appeared at the entrance. Ready? I nodded. Before leaving, I looked back at the boy. Keep drawing. I will. And don't become an accountant. He laughed. Why? Because Daniel is one. Daniel shouted from across the courtyard. I heard that. The boy laughed harder. I walked toward the gate. Daniel fell in a step beside me. You seem happy. I am. That's dangerous. Why? You're becoming sentimental. I smiled. Maybe. We reached the car. I stopped before opening the door. Daniel. What? Thank you. He looked uncomfortable. For what? For staying. He looked at me for a moment, then shook his head. You'd have done the same. I hope so. He opened the driver's door. Come on. I got in. As we drove away, the city lights passed across the window. I thought about the will. The first time I heard my name beside the word murderer, I thought my life was ending. It wasn't. It was being separated from the life I had mistaken for mine. The accusations had stripped away my position. The investigation stripped away my family's lies. My father's death stripped away the illusion that I could earn his approval. And walking away stripped away my fear. I lost an empire. I gained a life. I lost a father before I understood him. I gained the ability to forgive without pretending he had never hurt me. I lost the family I thought I needed. I found people I didn't have to beg to keep. And the man who once believed he could control me eventually learned the one lesson no contract could prevent. A person who no longer needs your approval cannot be ruled by your judgment. Years later, I returned to the Heir cemetery alone. There was no funeral, no reporters, no lawyers, no board members, just me. I stood before my father's grave. The city had changed. So had I. I placed the old fountain pen beside the stone. I kept it, I said. The wind moved through the trees. I thought I would need it to remember you. I smiled faintly. I don't. I touched the stone. I remember. That was enough. I stepped back. For a long time, I had thought closure meant finding the perfect answer. It didn't. Sometimes closure was simply reaching the point where the question stopped controlling you. I had no need to know whether my father had loved me perfectly. He hadn't. I had no need to know whether Malcolm regretted everything. He did. I had no need to know whether Samuel understood what he had destroyed. He did now. And I had no need to prove that I had survived. My life proved it every morning. I turned toward the cemetery gate. Then I stopped. The evening sun was falling behind the trees. For a moment, I looked back at my father's grave. I hope you were wrong about one thing. The words came quietly. You said I would win. I smiled. I didn't. I turned away. I just learned how to live. And that was the truth. The will had called me a murderer. The family had called me a traitor. The board had called me a liability. The newspapers had called me guilty. But none of them had known the man standing before them. They only knew the role they had assigned me. Son, heir, suspect, scapegoat. I had spent years trying to prove I wasn't those things. I finally understood I didn't need to prove anything. I could simply become someone else. Not Victor Hale's son. Not Malcolm's rival. Not Samuel Reed's enemy. Just Adrian. A man who had lost almost everything. A man who had been given every reason to become cruel. And chose not to. The city waited beyond the cemetery. My car waited by the road. My friends waited at home. My work waited tomorrow. Life waited. I walked toward it. And this time, there was nothing behind me that I needed to escape. Only a past I could finally remember without belonging to it. The grave disappeared from view. I kept walking, and I never looked back.